Now, what I want for you is to get down there and smack a hole in the lid of that box.
The coffin?
Yeah, the coffin. Come on now, boy.
If you'd be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself for the podcast?
Yeah, hi. My name is Matt Harvey. I do guitars and vocals for Exhumed and a few other bands.
So, you should be no stranger to listeners of this podcast. Of course, most people will know Exhumed, Gruesome, Decapitator, and a number of the other bands that you're involved with. For this podcast, we'll be focusing on Exhumed since you guys have a new album coming out at the end of October.
We do, yeah. I'm excited.
So let's jump right into that. What's the album called?
The album is called Horror, and it contains 15 tracks. I think it's quite sort of blunt and aggressive and to the point. I think the 15 songs stretch to something like 26 minutes or something like that. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of their nature.
So how would you compare this new album to your previous albums, specifically the previous two?
I think, to me, the band sort of works in sets of threes. We did 3 albums initially, and then took a hiatus, and then now that we've been back together and playing, we did 3 albums, and I felt like we kind of stretched out as far as I was personally comfortable with, stylistically. So this is sort of more of a stylistic contraction and a little bit of a refocusing, whereas Necrocracy was sort of, more deliberately paced and more melodic, and then Death Revenge was even more melodic with sort of this, cinematic sensibility or whatever. This record really is completely amelodic, extremely, fast and aggressive throughout, and has no adornments, no sound effects, no intros, no nothing. So it's kind of like we went as far as we could in one direction, and now we've kind of gone as far as we possibly can in another direction, all while kind of maintaining the same aesthetic that we've always had. It's not like we got like a a jazz funk interlude or anything like that. It's still Exhumed, but it's definitely focused on the opposite aspects of our style that the last record was.
Now, would you say this is a return to the style of the earliest Exhumed albums?
Not really. I mean, I've heard people, we've had the record done for a few months, and we've played it for some people and sent it to a few people. I've heard people say that, and to me, it doesn't seem like that really at all. But that's just going to be what people say. That's what I'm expecting. It's like, oh, it's return to form, and it's like, well, not really. This isn't what, the first record is actually much more stylistically expansive and has many more pretensions to more deliberate pacing and more melody than this album does. This album is, I guess, the closest one to it previously would be Slaughtercult, but this one is more. It's still more stripped back than Slaughtercult, and it's more, I guess, to me, it's more like an '80s death grind kind of album. Terrorizer, Repulsion, Napalm Death, sort of centric. There's not really even the early stuff that was more, is considered to be more grind. Still has a lot of, Swedish death metal and early Carcass and Bolt Thrower kind of influences. And we didn't really take too much influence from that this time around.
What is it that led you to revisit this earlier death grind sound?
It was a few different things. We played a show at Obscene Extreme where we only played stuff from the first 2 albums and the split with Hemdale. And we played the show, and it was a lot of fun, and it went over really good. I remember we got off stage, and our European booking agent, Luke, was there. He's like, oh, it's the best Exhumed show I've seen in 10 years. And I was like, really? Like that? That was the best show? Like, we have this other set with, all these interludes and songs strung together, in different clever ways, and we're playing, all these sort of intricate riffs, and there's these elaborate solos. But I'm like, yeah, that was the best set. Okay. Which just kind of made me roll my eyes, but it also kind of made me realize that a band can execute material at a high level, but at the same time, people have certain expectations, things that they want to hear certain bands do. And we had a lot of fun playing the set, and I had some stuff written that originally was going to be used for the Expulsion project that I did with Matt Olivo from Repulsion. Anyway, I ended up not being involved with that anymore. And so I had a few songs laying around, and I was like, well, these are good songs. I'd like to use them, but really sound like Exhumed. So I kind of went and rearranged them, and in the process of rearranging them, kind of got on I kind of get in like a groove working on whatever particular project it is. And I tend to write, 5 or 6 songs in a couple of weeks, and then come back to it a month later and write 5 or 6 more songs, whatever band it might be. And just sort of got into a groove, and I was like, fuck it, this is something different that we can do. Because, at this point, having played this kind of music for so long, it's hard to find a new take on it, every album. And I felt like this was a take that felt fresh to me anyway. And I was having fun writing it, and the guys were into it. And, also we built our own studio to record the album at. So we're not like trained studio engineers or anything. And, we had help recording it. But we knew that we couldn't do something as ambitious from a production standpoint as we did last album. So it was, it just sort of worked. The aesthetic that we were going for worked with the materials and the ability that we had. So it was cool because, it was really stressful building our own studio for like 3 months and then having to get in and record an album in 2 weeks. And if we had to string together all the stuff like we did with Death Revenge, I mean, we wouldn't have pulled it off in time. We would have been fucked.
Why did you decide to build your own studio and record it there?
This is one of those things. Basically, we started much less ambitiously. Our drummer, Mike, he sort of earned / inherited a t-shirt screening press. So we started screening a bunch of our own shirts, which was a great money saver, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, and we had a rehearsal space, and then we had another space where the screen printing shop was. And we were paying 2 rents. And it was a bit of a hassle, yada, yada, yada. Long story short, the place where Mike had a screen printing shop, he ended up having to move. And once that was necessitated, we found this place where we could ostensibly record, or where we could ostensibly rehearse and print shirts. I'm like, oh, okay, this would be great. And so we moved in and we started rehearsing, and it's in an industrial area, and all the businesses around us were like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, stop doing that. And we're like, it's 7 p.m. What are you doing still working? Like, get the fuck out of here. And they're like, no, this is when we work. I was like, oh my God, this is not, so we were in a situation where we kind of thrown all our eggs in this basket without really realizing that they didn't fit in the basket. And so we weren't able to move back to our old spots or resume how things had been. And we'd already thrown a bunch of money at moving to this bigger place and blah, 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 blah. And we're like, well, how do we soundproof it? And we started looking at how much it would cost to soundproof. And at that point, I was like, well, we can't pay for this. We don't have the money, number one. And number two, for this amount of money, if we're going to spend $4 or $5 grand soundproofing this place, we should just spend $7 or $8 grand and just build like a basic Pro Tools studio. Because if we're stuck here, we need to make it work. So, and obviously, if we're building a studio to record an album, we can get an advance from the label, which will help defray the costs. So that's what we decided to do. It was sort of, I don't know, we kind of ended up on a ledge and just decided to jump, basically. And it was quite a nerve-wracking project. I lost a lot of sleep at the beginning of the year, I'll tell you.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, it was originally meant to be just a practice space, and you guys decided to go the extra mile and make it your home studio. Right.
It was either that or we would have had to move, and we moved all this gear, and we moved our personal storage spaces in there, and we had a screen printing shop, and it was just, we were already so committed that the only logical way forward was to become even more committed. So it was too late to kind of cut and run. And so we just took the plunge, and now we have a studio that we marginally sort of know how to use, and we'll be sort of learning as we go, and hopefully recording a lot more projects there. Return like a fight.
So we should talk about the release of the upcoming album. I understand you have a special VHS edition.
Yeah, the whole the whole aesthetic of the album is sort of centered around like a video rental thing, which I don't know. It's maybe it doesn't sound super metal or whatever, but it was a big part of, especially early in the band. It was a big part of what we would do. It was like we go to the record store, then we go to work. We were like teenagers, so it was I worked at a comic store. Some of us worked at a car wash, whatever. And then we would go to rehearsal, and then there was a video place we used to go to called American Video, and they just had this great horror section. And after practice, we would get a pizza, get somebody's mom or dad to buy us some beer, and watch horror movies. And obviously, our whole lyrical thing has always been inspired by gory movies, scary movies, etc. So we just thought I wanted a title that was simple and straightforward. I wanted a cover image that was simple and straightforward. So I thought horror, and we just kind of went from there with the whole video rental thing. And the title of the album is just like a genre sticker on a VHS tape, just the horror, no font, no nothing, just like, oh, this is the category it goes under. And Relapse loved it. They were really into it, and they proposed this really over the top idea, and I was like, holy shit, this is great. I mean, one of the really cool things about the post record buying age that we now find ourselves in is that labels are much more open to doing really elaborate packaging that 20 years ago, when everybody had to just buy the record, they would never have wanted to invest that kind of money into something. And so they put the album on a VHS tape. They built like a box that everything comes in with the record and the VHS tape and the shirt and yada yada yada. That's like a cardboard VCR box, and it's really, they really knocked it out of the park, and they went the extra mile and then some. It's pretty amazing.
So this will actually be a playable VHS tape, right? It's not just
Yes.
a case.
No, it will be a playable VHS tape, which I didn't really understand at first. I was like, they sent me the images, and I was like, yeah, this is great. Just do it, whatever you guys want to do. And then I went back and reread it, and I was like, wait, what? The album is on. I was like, how many people are actually going to play this? Like, I don't even have a VCR anymore. I mean, I have a couple boxes of VHS tapes, but I don't have any. I don't have a VCR. My last one died like 5 years ago. So I was like, who's going to play this? Somebody awesome, obviously, but I don't even know. I just think it's a really cool, collector's item, and it's I'm very pleased with the way Relapse has started to get behind the record, and people were really hyped on it. They sold, I mean, I think they were like $100 each, and they made 100 of them, and they sold in like hours, which I was like, I can't believe somebody's paying $100 for a 25-minute album, but it is pretty fucking neat,
So we're similar in age. We may have to explain for people listening who are much younger that well, not just what a VHS tape was, but also kind of the culture that went along with going to the video store and renting an old B horror movie. Pre-internet, pre-torrents.
Right, and it sounds so weird. Like, I mean, I'm 43, but sometimes talking about this stuff because so much of my time is spent dealing with media, music, movies, comics, whatever, and talking about how much things have changed in the last 20 years. It sounds like when my granddad used to drive through town and be like, I remember when this was a farm. I was like, oh my god, shut up. But basically, in once the home video technology kind of came out in the early 80s, it was a really big deal. It was like the prestige purchase. Every family was like, all right, we're not gonna go on vacation this year, guys. We're gonna get a VCR, and then we'd own Raiders of the Lost Ark, and then somebody's weird friend would get a copy of Star Wars that somebody sat in the fucking movie theater with a camcorder and filmed, and you'd watch that. But there was like a whole network of small independent mom and pop video stores everywhere. And before Blockbuster kind of homogenized everything in the 90s, the mom and pops were great because they were just these independent operators who, of course, they had to have Back to the Future or whatever the hits were. But because they were small stores, they were much more open to independent film distribution. So you could go to random video store in random city and find, all these weird unrated horror movies and stuff because the stores were small and it wasn't so homogenized. They needed to fill the fucking store. Independent distributor comes in with a bunch of shitty ass horror movies and they'll probably take it. So there was a real kind of a cornucopia of independent horror movies that you could get everywhere in the 80s. And it was a great time to be a pimply faced hormonal nerd and just hang around with your buddies and watch heads explode and stuff. It was great. So that was, to me, that was where I came from first before I even really got into metal. I was like 10 years old and I really loved comic books and tabletop role playing games and horror movies. And then I heard metal, and by the time I heard like heavier stuff, I was like 12, I think, when I heard like Scream Bloody Gore, and I was like, this is like the sonic version of Evil Dead 2 or Reanimator or whatever. And then something kind of clicked, and anyway, here we are 30 years later talking about this. So that's the best summary I can give, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that sums it up perfectly. And the parallels between the independent horror movies and the death metal and metal underground are striking in the sense that you would have your more mainstream popular horror movies that would come out from large studios, but you also had studios like Full Moon doing these depraved shoestring B movies in the same way that you had smaller labels releasing bands that weren't necessarily as popular as Carcass or Napalm Death or whoever, but were also very much within the genre and filling out a scene that you wouldn't know from just whatever came out on Roadrunner or Eureka, right, or whoever.
No, that's absolutely true. And I mean, there's like a real in terms of how the industry worked, there's a real parallel there because a major studio that's making Nightmare on Elm Street doesn't care about making Slaughter High or whatever, or Sorority Massacre 3. But a much smaller studio is like, well, hey, there's real money there. Like, why don't we do it? Because all the people, there's a whole scene of people that don't just want to see Nightmare on Elm Street. It's the exact same thing with metal, like, towards the end of the 80s, like, it was really, as a death metal fan, if you wanted a death metal record, yeah, you could get like Leprosy, but then you're waiting around and there's nothing else that you can just go to warehouse music, that was a store back then, and buy. So you'd have to find imports, whether it's Slaughter or Necrophagia or a dub cassette with a master demo on it or whatever was circulating in 87, 88. And because some people had a real hunger for this, it's like once you heard Rain and Blood and then you heard Scream Bloody Gore or Beyond the Gates or whatever, you're like, I just want this. I don't care about Metallica anymore, whatever. I just want this shit. And it was you kind of had to dig a little bit, but there was definitely a lot of smaller independent players that wanted to satisfy that itch that maybe Combat Records thought wasn't profitable enough for a few years.
Yeah, absolutely. So for anybody listening to this who wants to find out more about the VHS culture of the 80s and early 90s, there's a really great documentary called Rewind This, which deals with a lot of the smaller independent horror VHS B movies and some of the packaging that went along with it. Moving on, let's talk about the lineup for this new album. You guys, you have one member who I think will be familiar to listeners of this podcast.
Well, let's see. We have myself, who's been there since the beginning, I guess, and we have our drummer Mike Hamilton, that's been playing with us for, I guess, 9 years now. And before that, he was playing with Deeds of Flesh, and before that, he was playing with Vile. Our bassist, vocalist Ross Sewage. He played on the first Exhumed record and on a bunch of our demos and splits, and then left in '99 and has been back in the band now for, I think, 4 years or so. And this is his second album back with us. Ross also is known for playing with, Impaled and Ludacra and another band that he's not supposed to say he's in, but everybody knows he's in anyway, and that's fine. And then Sebastian Phillips is the new kid. He's also the guitarist for Noisem, and he is our new sort of lead guitar player-ish. I mean, we both play leads, but he's more of the featured lead guitar player. And this is his first record with us.
So how did Sebastian end up joining you guys?
We met him when we were on tour with Carcass and Obituary. Exhumed and Noisem were both out with them, and we became friends with all the Noisem boys, the Noisy boys. And because Sebastian lives in Baltimore, really close to Maryland Death Fest, and Noisem's jam room is basically in his basement, there was a couple times when Exhumed and my other band Gruesome were playing MDF, and we needed to get in a quick rehearsal, and we would end up going into Sebastian's basement and rehearsing there. And so we hung out a little bit more, and I got to know him. You know, I knew I liked him, and I knew he was a good guitar player, but I kind of got to learn a little bit more about his sort of musical grounding, you know, where he was coming from. So when it came time, basically our old guitar player, Bud, great guy, great guitar player, but just really lost interest in touring, which I can't blame him for. And, you know, he kind of just kept turning down tours. We would bring these offers to him. He'd be like, no. And so we're like, well, we have to go. Like, we need to go. We have a record to promote. Like, this is a big, you know, part of not just like our personal identity and stuff, but it's part of our livelihood. Like, we need to get out and play these shows. So Sebastian came in and filled in and did great. And like I said, the more I learned about him as a guitar player, the more I thought, oh, this guy he's on the same wavelength, you know. He and I have the same idea about what constitutes like a good guitar player. Like, you don't meet that many guys that play death metal or grind or whatever you want to call it, who are talking about Eddie Van Halen and Robin Trower and Michael Schenker, Richie Blackmore, Gary Moore, and these kinds of more rock-oriented guitar players, because that's more my thing. Like, I'm more into rock, just, you know, rock. And most death metal guitar players are much more narrowly focused than that. They like death metal and then maybe, you know, whatever thrash band they heard first, and that's it. Whereas I'm more apt to be listening to like Deep Purple or Rainbow or something like that than, you know, esophageal fetal dismemberment or whatever the fuck, you know. That's not really that's not what I spend my time listening to that much on a daily basis. So once we kind of clicked that way, then it was just a really, really easy transition, and it's been it's been a real positive thing.
So did Sebastian also contribute to the songwriting?
Yeah, he wrote 2 songs on the record. He wrote The Red Death and he wrote Rabid. So hopefully moving forward, he will be contributing more, you know. As much as I'm a fairly prolific songwriter, I don't have much trouble coming up with material, but I really enjoy getting contributions from other people and maybe just, you know, getting mildly involved in the arrangements, and that's it. It's great, you know. Like The Red Death, Sebastian wrote the music and I wrote the lyrics. I'm like, oh, I love this song. I don't have to do anything except sing. This is great.
For the tombs that we met
This is interesting because this is the first time I'm interviewing a band where I've interviewed three of the members for four different bands. I'm speaking to you now. Years past, I interviewed Sebastian for Noisem, and I interviewed Ross for Impaled and for a band that where he went by a different name and spoke in a French accent.
Yes, right. The band that we don't.
Right,
Yeah,
the band that he's not officially
that
part
band.
of. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, but he's strangely affiliated with so much of what they do. It's weird. I don't know. It's like Clark Kent and Superman. Like what? I don't know.
I will say that when I interviewed that band, they threatened to kill me and eat me. So I'm lucky to be speaking to you now.
Yeah, you made it out of the interview. That's good. Yeah, I mean, people ask me about the lineup changes and stuff that we've had a lot because we've had a lot of lineup changes, and at this point, I kind of look at Exhumed as like the death metal, like Deep Purple. Like people come and people go, and they leave and they come back and they get fired, and then we hate each other, and then we realize that we're friends after all, and it's like it's just sort of an extended family kind of thing, and I've come to terms with it, and it's working for us. But at the same time, I do feel like we've had a fairly stable lineup because Mike and I have kind of been the nucleus for quite a while now, and then Ross coming back in was a really seamless transition because we'd worked together before, and Bud, our old guitar player, was living in North Carolina, and so it wasn't like he was terribly involved in the day-to-day stuff anyway. And Sebastian lives in Baltimore. I'm in California. So it's really, not that much has changed. So to me, it doesn't really feel like, much of a transition at all at this point. And I think, knock on wood, I mean, we're not planning on shifting lineups or changing anything in the foreseeable future. But I mean, you never know what life is going to throw at you. So we'll just keep on going. And, if whatever happens, we'll figure out a way to continue on, and it'll be what it is.
So this may be a good point to talk about the history and the legacy of Exhumed, because this is a band that you formed when you were still in high school, and it's 21 years ago that you released the first album on Relapse, Gore Metal.
Right.
So when you formed the band, what did you actually set out to accomplish?
I was 15 when we started, doing like rehearsal demos and stuff. And we played our first show, I think like 5 days after maybe 6 days after I turned 16. And, I don't think that we really had the knowledge about not just the music industry, but about music in general to really like concretely outline any goals aside from like writing sick riffs, bro. That was about as far as we thought. For me, when I was in high school, like we had a demo, we did a 7-inch, and we were like the local opener for everybody from Autopsy, Cannibal Corpse, Morbid Angel, Sadist, Master, Suffocation, Dismember, Entombed. No, we didn't do Entombed. I'm sorry. I can't remember. I don't know. It's too long ago. I don't think we did it. Anyway, so for me, I was like, well, I got a demo that's getting reviewed in fanzines. I got a 7-inch, and I'm playing with like a bunch of my favorite bands. So I felt like things were going really well. But I didn't really have much of a concept outside of that. And then, after high school, the whole scene kind of shifted. I graduated in 93, and in the Bay Area where I grew up, death metal was never as accepted as, the Bay Area thrash stuff with Exodus and Testament and Metallica, et cetera, et cetera. And by 93, the entire kind of metal scene really faded really quickly. Like within a year and a half, we went from having, 3 venues at least that only really had rock and metal to having, a couple of venues that would occasionally have an underground metal show, and the whole landscape shifted completely away. And like the biggest bands at that time where I'm from were like Faith No More and Primus and stuff. And, it wasn't cool to play metal anymore at all. So that was kind of a big realigning and a big shock for us. So we got a new bass player named Matt Widener, who also played with our old drummer Cole in Cretan, and he did a Carcass tribute band called the County Medical Examiners. That was all much later, but he came in and he was a much better musician than we were, and he sort of, was like, "What is the count on this riff?" And we're like, "Wait, you have to count?" I'm like, what? And so he helped us sort of develop a little bit musically, and that's kind of what we did when we were kids. So that was the first time I think that we started having some goals. Matt Widener came in and helped us out musically, and then Ross joined right around that same time. The first time Ross joined, and Ross was a very organized, very goal-oriented person, and he took over doing all the mail and all the correspondence and that sort of thing. And so then the goal sort of became like, cool, we've done a couple demos, we did one 7-inch record, like how do we translate this into something that is going to get us the ability to record an album, and that sort of became the goal. And then eventually we figured that out, and eventually somebody became interested in what we were doing, because the style of music we were playing was very uncool. After like 94, nobody wanted to hear like a brutal grinding death metal band with thrash influences. That's like the least cool thing you could be doing. So finally, just through persistence and the fact that eventually when you're doing something that's really not cool, you're going to stand out for doing that. And at least that's one way of getting noticed. And then we got the deal with Relapse. And then I guess the goal became to tour, just to do a tour. And then we did that. And then, then it kind of changed from there. I mean, but it wasn't really, there was no master plan. We just knew, you read in a magazine like, oh, we did a demo and then so and so heard it and then we got a record deal, and they're like, well, we have a demo and now all we need is for Monty Connor from Roadrunner to hear it or whatever, and then we'll get a record deal. And it turned out to be much more complicated than that.
When we're talking about the mid-90s, we should, I think most people will know, but death metal and metal in general, but specifically the original style of very fast death and grind had fallen out of favor, and most of the bigger bands had either broken up or changed their style drastically at that point.
Yes.
What was it about the style that you guys decided you were just going to stick with this and you weren't going to, follow whatever else was popular around you?
I think, for me, I one of the things that appealed to me about death metal was that it wasn't popular. I remember like going way back to even when I was like a little kid, they'd be like, oh, like you're smart and you should do this and you should do that. And I was like, I don't want that pressure to succeed. Like, I don't want that. I just want to study what's interesting to me and just do my own shit. And one of the things I think that appealed to me about death metal was, when I was a little kid, Metallica was playing fucking stadiums and everyone's like, oh, look, you can be a rock star. And I was like, I don't want to be a fucking rock star. I just want to play music that I like, that's gross and bums people out. So I liked the fact that it was sort of success proof, because there would be no pressure to succeed, and nobody would be like, how come you're not playing at the Globo Dome or Enormo Dome? Like, have you heard my band? Like, of course we're not playing the fucking Globo Dome. This is stupid. So that, I never really cared what was popular, and it was kind of more like when it became unpopular, to me it became more important to be into it, because you would see bands that I grew up listening to, like Exodus or whatever, and you'd see them forming these bands that sounded like Pantera and Machine Head in the mid-90s, and I was like, this is so whack. Like, I believed in what you were doing more than you believed in it. This is fucking bullshit, man. And so and to me it was also like, this is what we started doing. We all hated records like Cold Lake or whatever, or even Heartwork when it came out was like, fuck this shit. So I now like both of those records, but at the time, so it was like, we're not going to do that. We're going to stay in the same style. We're just going to be us, and the less cool it is to be us, then that's fine. Like, I'd rather be king of the shit heap than peasant of the fucking big shiny money making successful world. Like, I don't want to change with the times. I just want to change according to my own whim, and that's it. So, and honestly, I just like fast metal. Like mid-paced, slower metal. Like I like some of it, but it doesn't really. I don't listen to slam. I don't listen to groove metal or whatever the fuck. It just doesn't appeal to me. I like all kinds of music, and I can scratch those itches elsewhere much more effectively than listening to like paid bullshit. Like I still don't like Fear, Emptiness, Despair. I thought it was just a pile of garbage. And I love the Napalm guys. They're my friends, and I respect everything they've done, but I just don't care for it. So I felt like it was some real estate that we could carve out as our own because nobody else wanted it, and that was a point of pride. We used to show up to gigs wearing like bullet belts and like Destruction shirts in 1995. And people were like, "Oh, that's really funny." I'm like, "There's nothing fucking funny about this, even in the slightest, man. Like, this is what we do. We play fast music, and we like bullets and spikes and fire and leather and cool shit. That's it."
I credit Relapse with really bringing grindcore back from the dead, in the sense that they they signed a lot of newer bands like Soilent Green and Nasum, who are doing new things with the genre, or I guess tweaking the genre slightly while being true to the principles.
Right.
But also bands like Exhumed and Impaled, I think by staying true to the original vision of gore-grind and grindcore, really became kind of a rallying point for fans who, like you, weren't that thrilled with Swan Song or mid to late '90s Napalm Death, and just really wanted grindcore to be the way it was. And in a way, what you guys did, it kind of became a self-fulfilling prophecy, because once you, I mean, I don't want to say success, but
That's not the word I'd use.
I mean,
yeah.
once you achieved a certain popularity, and the people who were looking for that sound had a band to rally around, I think it really brought back some of the older bands, not just bands like Napalm, who returned to a faster style, not necessarily their original style, but also bands like Carcass and Repulsion, who had broken up, reformed, and in the case of both bands are touring, and in the case of Carcass, actually put out an album.
Right. It took, however many years of just touring the hits. I mean, that's cool. I'd like to think that we were part of that. I mean, there definitely was a real sagging point, in the mid '90s, and the only kind of current bands that I was into at the time, in at least in this, in the genre that we sort of inhabit, they were all from overseas. There was still stuff like the Morbid Records stuff, like Hemorrhage and Regurgitate and shit, that we really took a lot of influence from. But we were always, we always considered ourselves a metal band, and we always had like Slayer riffs and Possessed riffs and stuff like that. But it was the same kind of spirit, and I think that by the end of the '90s, death metal had gone away so hard that people kind of realized, oh, maybe we just got too dazzled by the black and white makeup and the church burning and the groove of Pantera or whatever. And maybe we left something behind, like maybe we forgot. And there was, that's when Dying Fetus started getting really popular, and Nile, and we managed to put out a record. And like you said, Noisem, that was a really big thing, specifically for us and Noisem. I think people, had forgotten about that sort of early earache kind of sound. And we played together. We played 10 shows together, and it was just like peanut butter and jelly. Like, we got along really well with the guys, and our styles were really complementary, and people, seemed to respond to both bands a lot. And it was really vindicating, I guess, And then, once we got a record out, and then Impaled got a record out, and that kind of opened the door for like the Razorback type bands or whatever. And so that was, it was nice to see that I was right. I guess, I guess there's a way that you can be so backwards looking that eventually you're forwards looking, and that's a position I've found myself in a couple of times at least. We were doing Decapitator in like '97, and then 10 years later, Municipal Waste is fucking playing to like 600 people. I was like, huh. Well, I was on to something. I didn't really think of it as that serious, but okay. Obviously, it's not that they are influenced by us or whatever. It's just that we had a similar idea, and they took it much further and did it much better than we ever did. So yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for sticking to your guns and just doing what you believe in and all that corny shit, But it also is, it's a fucking grind, It's like like the blast beat kind, like it's like an endurance test, When you go from being in high school and once a month playing, to 400 people opening for Cannibal Corpse, and then for 5 years you're playing basements and house shows and punk rock squats and all this sort of stuff. Like, it really will test your dedication to seeing this kind of thing through.
And what brings you back to Exhumed?
I think the reason why we kind of took a hiatus is because after we did the third record, our drummer Cole, who's like my closest friend, I've known him since I was 11. He had graduated college and he was basically ready to start his career. He's a biochemist. I'm not exactly sure. I guess his title now is scientist. That's apparently official title. He works in cancer research. He's got a lovely family and a beautiful daughter, and he's very successful and happy. But he was sort of getting ready to start that chapter of his life. So he left the band, and we just could not really seem to find a drummer that really fit with us. And our bass player at the time, Bud, who was later our guitar player, he quit shortly after Cole. And then our guitar player, Mike, and I kind of tried to soldier on and promote the record and put a new lineup together. And it just seemed like nothing really felt cohesive. I think part of it was the fact that we didn't have the right people. And then part of it, I think, also was that I had an idea about the band that was not based in reality. I was still thinking that it was 1984 and you and your three buddies are going to stick together for 20 years and take on the world. And that's not really how it works. So that's why we split up. And then, I'm not a big like tech death fan. I'm not a big slam fan. And that seemed to really kind of take over in the early 2000s, or the mid 2000s. That was really what people were interested in. And I wasn't interested in that. So I was interested more in playing like traditional metal and thrash metal and stuff. And also I thought, fucking, almost 30, maybe I should get a job. Anyway, then I realized that jobs suck. I mean, I have one, but still. And I just, eventually kind of got hungry to play kind of heavier, faster music, like slowly kept, had all these guitars in E, and I kept sort of tuning down a little bit. And I was like, oh shit, I'm just writing Zoom songs now. And so it felt like, there was something unfinished from when we split up. And it also felt like, the kind of people's interest was turning back around towards the band. And I kind of realized that, using a less romanticized approach to, maintaining the lineup and stuff, it wouldn't be that hard to find people to be in the band and to make it a functional thing going forward. And so that's sort of, the short version of how we got here from 10 years ago.
So it sounds like Exhumed is really just home base for you. This is where you feel most comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, like I do a lot of, I'm always writing music, whether it's just for my own enjoyment or for another band or whatever. And I really enjoy and believe in the stuff that I do with other bands and the stuff that I write. But to me, Exhumed feels more like the closest it'll get to a sort of amalgamation of my various musical tastes. I mean, like Death Revenge, I've really felt like was it was really representative of a lot of stuff that I listened to, because there was stabs at doing stuff like Christopher Young or John Carpenter, and then there was also nods to like Daft Punk and Metallica and Slayer and Exodus, along with Napalm, Bolt Thrower, Carcass, Repulsion, and the usual suspects and stuff. And I feel like this is the band where it's just like me sort of doing whatever I want. Whereas like with Gruesome, it's very specifically, it's set up to be a death tribute band. Pounder, it's specifically a new wave of British heavy metal / 80s metal kind of thing. Not just, I can't just really, throw everything that I like in there, or else it wouldn't make sense. Exhumed is the closest I can sort of come to putting everything that I'm into into a blender.
So before I let you go, let's talk about what Exhumed has coming out. We should mention that Horror, the album, will be coming out on October 4th, and shortly after that, you guys will have a tour with Gatecreeper and Necrot.
Yeah, we have a big tour with us, Gatecreeper, Necrot, and Judiciary. Necrot and ourselves are playing some additional dates before and after the tour, kind of covering a few of the markets that the tour doesn't hit, and that's going to be announced. I'm not sure how soon this podcast is going live, but it should be announced probably right after the 3-day weekend coming up. So that's just being finalized right now. Yeah, we're really excited about it. It's a very extensive tour. I mean, we're playing fucking Bozeman, Montana on this tour. So we're trying to cover as much ground as we can right out of the gate. And, I think it's a lineup that people are going to be excited about. I'm excited about it. So, it's a good tour, and we got some new production and, some new songs on the set list and all that good stuff. So should be a, fairly good time for people that are into this kind of thing.
So Necrot is a Bay Area band.
Yeah.
And they're an example of what I would say is, I mean, the band might dispute this, but I feel like that's a band that very much lives in the shadow of Exhumed. Like, I don't know how that band exists if Heartwork and Swan Song happened and Exhumed didn't. Do you know what I mean?
Well, that's very nice of you to say.
I like that band a lot, but when I think of the current style of gore-grind or death grind that has that sound, it's very much, I'm hearing Exhumed and Impaled more than I'm hearing, except maybe, or Symphonies of Sickness era Carcass, but really it's you guys that kind of set the boundaries and set the borders for that style of grindcore.
Well, that's very flattering. I don't know that I necessarily hear that, but I think that Necrot, right now there's sort of you could say an embarrassment of riches in like death metal, or you could say a glut. You'd probably be right. He's saying either one, but I think they're one of the bands that, for me, as somebody that's maybe a bit more jaded, having heard all this stuff the first time around, Necrot is one of the bands that really sticks out and kind of grabs me as a listener. And I think, from the first time I saw them, I was really impressed, and they've gotten just better and better and better. And I think they're going to be, it's like anything else, a style kind of experiences a resurgence, and then there's like 100 bands doing it, and then 5 years later, there's maybe 3 or 4 that will have a career and some staying power. And I would be shocked if Necrot isn't one of those 3 or 4 bands that will be around in 5 or 6 years when retro Norwegian black metal takes over the universe, or whatever the fuck is next. I think that they, whatever it is, that it, that I think that they are a band that has it. I think that they're one of my favorites. So I'm really excited to be doing a lot of shows with them, and we're working on some more shows elsewhere in the future with them. So it's, I think it's a good pairing, and it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it sounds like a great tour. Besides the tour and the album release, is there anything else you want to plug?
I mean, not in particular. We're going to be doing a new Gruesome record probably at the end of the year. We're doing a new Pounder EP before we leave for this Exhumed tour. So, I mean, I'm always, trying to stay busy and keep working, but I don't know that there's that much overlap between those 3 things. So that's about all I got.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, man. That was great.
Death with needles of violence, blinded beyond recognition. Her fingerprints crushed, brain beat the boss, last one's a true liberation. The end is rush of the flames left behind. Sickles, scorn, and depression is all they will find. So many misdemeanors and death starts and done. The last is no fine. Because the death was made to making up with the work even more brittle. Hands up and bounce to the grave. The shadows of brownstone trying like you. Clouds of scorn to see what's on the end. Next, God is corrected in some. Riding on slab, whether it's aware.